She lay on her bed, the darkness around her thick with silence. Each night sleep abandoned her, leaving her alone with the haunting memories of Ike's death. She tossed restlessly, her mind a battlefield of anguish and unanswered questions. His face hovered in her thoughts, his smiles now a ghostly reminder of everything she lost. She had cried until her tears ran dry, leaving only a hollow ache in her chest. Her family had turned their backs on her, disapproving of the love she had for Ike. With him gone, she felt more isolated than ever. Was this all life had to offer? An endless cycle of love and loss, with no respite in sight. Just as dawn began to creep through her window, a sharp knock shattered the fragile silence. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly rose from the bed. She opened the door and her breath caught in her throat. 3 stern-faced policemen stood on her doorstep, their eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Fear slithered through her veins as she clutched the doorknob. The officer in front, tall and imposing, spoke with an authority that brooked no argument. "We need you to come with us. It's about the death of Ike." Her world tilted, the ground beneath her feet threatening to give way. Scared and confused, she could only nod and followed them. They led her to the station where she was asked to make a statement about Ike's death. How could she explain what she didn't understand herself? Her mind raced, desperately searching for answers that weren't there. Her hand trembled as she struggled to find the words. Just then an officer leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. "You are hiding something and we will find out what it is." Her thoughts shattered under the weight of his words. What could she possibly write? The truth was, she had no idea what really happened to Ike, and this terrified her the more. Lost in thought, Nneka continued to tremble when, all of a sudden, a great commotion erupted in the station. A group of people had been arrested, and they were rather troublesome. In the chaos that followed, Nneka felt an opportunity to escape had presented itself. Without a second thought, she bolted, running as fast as her legs could carry her. When calm finally returned to the station, the police officers realized that Nneka had escaped. A quick search turned up nothing, and in their desperation to avoid the wrath of their superiors, the lead policeman who had arrested Nneka pointed the finger at another officer. He accused the officer, who had leaned in to speak with her earlier, of advising Nneka to run. The accused officer scowled and vehemently denied the charge, explaining that he had never encouraged her to escape. But before he could protest further, he was handcuffed and thrown into a cell. He cried and pleaded, insisting on his innocence, arguing there was no reason for him to have helped Nneka escape. Another officer mocked him, suggesting that he had a soft spot for women and had been angling for a way to approach Nneka. Amaka, the accused officer, now had a harsh lesson in what it felt like to be wrongfully accused. He vowed that if he ever escaped the wrath of his colleagues, he would become a changed man. He suddenly became fervent in prayer. But luck was not on his side. After a swift and unfair trial, he was found guilty and thrown into prison. It all felt like a nightmare. His once promising career in the police force had been abruptly cut short. As he sat in his cell, he was consumed with regret for having been so eager to talk to Nneka while she struggled to write her statement. He couldn't help but wonder where she had escaped to and what would become of her. Nneka ran as fast as her legs could carry her. Going home wasn't an option, she knew that much. In her confusion, she considered fleeing to a place where no one would recognize her. But how could she survive with nothing? She couldn't bear the thought of being jailed for a crime she hadn't committed. Her thoughts kept drifting to Ike, and the pain of losing him overwhelmed her. If only he were still alive, everything would have turned out differently. Who had taken his life, and why? What purpose could such cruelty serve? The world seemed unbearably wicked. Just then, a voice called her name. It was a driver who had once lived in her neighborhood. He was delighted to see her, unaware of the turmoil she was in. Nneka accepted his offer of a free ride with immense relief. It felt like a brief respite from the chaos engulfing her. Now, far from home, her only focus was survival. Meanwhile, the officer who had led the raid on Nneka's home had been tasked with finding her, the key to solving the mystery surrounding Ike's death. But with Amaka, a brilliant officer, now in prison, the investigation was suffering a major setback. Amaka had crucial information about who had killed Ike, and he pleaded repeatedly for his release, insisting that he could help solve the case. However, Io, the lead officer in charge of Nneka's case, was blocking Emeka's retrial, which only delayed the investigation further. Io was becoming increasingly frustrated with the situation. Nneka had vanished without a trace, and every day she remained missing, the case grew colder. With no progress in the search for Nneka and Emeka's constant pleas for release, a strong case for his freedom was built by Whale, a superior officer. However, Io dismissed Whale's suggestion, claiming that Whale and Emeka were too alike, thus questioning Whale's motives for advocating Emeka's release. This sparked a major conflict among the officers. Eventually, an impending transfer reshuffled the team. Io and several other officers were relocated to different regions. Following Emeka's retrial, he was released and reassigned to the case of finding Ike's killer and, by extension, locating Nneka. In the meantime, Nneka, ever resilient, had reinvented herself as a food vendor. Her business flourished, attracting more customers with each passing day. One day, just as everything seemed to be going well, a familiar figure stepped into her eatery. Nneka's heart sank. It was Io. Before Io could see her, Nneka quickly slipped away, but not without Io catching a glimpse of her. Realizing she was recognized, Nneka decided to lay low, allowing her staff to manage the business while she kept out of sight. Meanwhile, Emeka, now fully in charge of the investigation, wasted no time assembling a skilled team. He dispatched his men to blend in with the local crowd, hoping to gather valuable information. It was during this operation that a driver, who had unknowingly transported Nneka to her new neighborhood, casually mentioned to Emeka how he had run into his old acquaintance, Nneka, and expressed an interest in rekindling their friendship. Little did the driver know, he had just given Emeka the breakthrough he needed. Back in town, Io had grown closer to Nneka, who believed that their friendship might shield her from arrest. She allowed the relationship to develop, thinking it would keep her safe. One afternoon, as they relaxed in her eatery, a police raid suddenly unfolded. Both Io, Nneka, and some of her staff were arrested. The investigation ramped up, and through a series of interrogations and cross-examinations, a shocking truth came to light. The person least expected to be involved turned out to be Ike's killer, Io himself. He had long harbored feelings for Nneka and saw Ike as an obstacle. Knowing how deeply Nneka loved Ike, Io had murdered him to clear the way for himself. Instead of arresting Nneka after recognizing her, Io had hoped to finally develop the relationship he had always wanted. Io was charged with Ike's murder. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Nneka, relieved that justice had been served and her name cleared, began to grow closer to Emeka. In time, their friendship blossomed into love, and they were married in a grand society wedding. Emeka's career soared, and Nneka's family, grateful for all he had done, wholeheartedly blessed their union. After her long and painful ordeal, Nneka finally found happiness. The couple went on to have twins, a boy and a girl. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel.